Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Muchas gracias a todos por compartir esta noche con nosotros. Thank you all so much for joining us for this special evening to honor the Cuban engineer. I am Maria Estorino, chair of the Cuban Heritage Collection, and it's my privilege to welcome you to the Roberto C. Goizueta Pavilion, home of the Cuban Heritage Collection. It's fitting that we would host an event like this one to honor the Cuban engineer in the Goizueta Pavilion. Mr. Goizueta is recognized for his business leadership and acumen as chairman and CEO of the Coca-Cola Company from 1981 until his death in 1997, but he began his career in the technical department of the Coca-Cola Company in Cuba as a chemical engineer. And additionally, with funding from the Goizueta Foundation, we here at the Cuban Heritage Collection have supported the Cuban Infrastructure Challenge for the past 3 years in different ways, but most significantly in supporting the participation of some of the University of Miami students in the challenge. So we're especially honored to be sharing this evening with all of you today. During the day, this space that we're in right now is actually a very quiet reading room. It's a space where students and scholars from all over the world carry out research, discovering and exploring the rich treasures that are housed right behind this wall here. We are a library and an archive holding millions of pages of Cuba's history and culture dating back 500 years, but also documenting the Cuban experience of the present, both on the island and in the diaspora. Here you might find everything from a Dutch map of Cuba from the 1500s, to Celia Cruz's shoes, to original scripts for Que Pasa USA, to blogs published by dissidents on the island today. As our name implies, we are interested in Cuba's past, our heritage, but we are equally concerned with the present and the future. The work we do is centered on preservation, but with a clear focus on making these resources that we collect discoverable, putting them in the hands of our students, our faculty, scholars, and the interested researcher. And we do this because we want to allow for the stories that are housed behind this wall to become part of the larger history that we all share. Stories like that of the Cuban engineer. We tell part of that story in the exhibit when you first walk in the exhibit gallery, which looks a little bit at the history of Cuban engineering, both on the island and here in the United States. And we're able to share this history because the documentary evidence of it is preserved and available here in the Cuban Heritage Collection. The exhibit draws on historical resources housed here, but also from documents and publications lent to us by our sponsors. So this is where it's my honor and privilege to take a moment to thank the sponsors, the organizations and the individuals who partnered with us here at the Cuban Heritage Collection to make possible both the event and tonight's celebration. So as I say your name, if you could please join me at the podium, I would really appreciate it. So I extend our deepest gratitude to the Association of Cuban Engineers, especially its president, Dr. Elena Solo Gabriel, and President-elect Pete Martinez. To the Cuban-American Association of Civil Engineers, in particular board members Pedro Giralt, Delfín Molins, and President Victor Pujals. Dean James Tian, who could not be here tonight, of the University of Miami College of Engineering, and Dean Amir Mirmoran of the Florida International University College of Engineering and Computing. Our dean here at the University of Miami Libraries, who also could not be here, but I'd like to thank him for his support, Dean Charles Ekman. And last but never least, the amigos of the Cuban Heritage Collection, whose president, Aldo Leiva, is here. Right now. Okay. We also thank Bacardi for their sponsorship. It's not a fun night if Bacardi is not with us. The Institute for Cuban and Cuban-American Studies and the FIU Cuban Research Institute for their support of this event. Dr. Jorge Duani, the director of the Cuban Research Institute, is here, so thank you. And also, I cannot forget the team here at the Cuban Heritage Collection and the libraries, who it really takes a village to make these kinds of evenings and these kind of exhibits possible. So thank you to everyone that makes that possible. And finally, I thank you. Thank you so much for being here tonight and for helping us to honor the Cuban engineers, so many of whom are here in the room today. So now it's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, who was just up here, Pete Martinez. Pete is a graduate of the University of Miami, where he's been recognized as distinguished alumni and as a member of Tau Beta Pi and the Iron Arrow Honor Society. He's a veteran of the information technology industry, was an IBM vice president and is currently a visiting professor at MIT. He's also the incoming president of the Association of Cuban Engineers. And so now I ask you to please join me in welcoming him to the podium.
This is a celebration 300 years in the making. Anybody remember when the University of Havana was founded? Many of you were there. The year was 1726. So we're coming up on the 300th anniversary of a very, very long heritage that we have as Cubans. Just to put it in perspective, Harvard University was founded in this country in the year 1638. So it's that legacy. It is one of the key institutions in this hemisphere from a legacy point of view. But we're here to celebrate and to honor the Cuban engineer of yesterday, the Cuban engineer of today, and the Cuban engineer of tomorrow. But we pay special homage to those that made the transition, the valiant transition from Cuba to the United States, leaving everything except their values, their commitment, and their education. We recognize that South Florida was actually one of the greatest beneficiaries of all of this talent. Within a very short period of time, thousands of engineers came to this city and created what is now the showcase for the hemisphere in terms of one of the world-leading cities. But it was so important in that transition period that we recognize that these great, great individuals not only came on and learned a different language and created new jobs, but they were powerful enough and visionary enough to look backwards and say, there are 1,000 more coming behind me, what can I do to help? So that unselfish pride and that unselfish caring is what created this legacy. So you're going to hear tonight about the specific programs that were put in place by great institutions like the University of Miami and FIU to actually enable this transition and project it and create the excellence that we've had. Now, aside from the typical infrastructure that you associate with engineers, which is the buildings, the roads, the waterways, there were some very, very important technological advancements that are attributed to the Cuban-American engineer. Right outside, when you walk on your right-hand side, is one of the first IBM personal computers developed, 1981. It's like number 3 off the lot. We were able to borrow that from the Historical Society of Boca Raton. Why is that so meaningful? Over 50 Cuban-American engineers worked on that first IBM personal computer, which changed the world forever. So if you look at the contributions in the technology field, you start looking at some major, major accomplishments from individuals that highlight. You're going to hear some very, very magical words. The namesake of this institution, Ingeniero Roberto Goizueta, he was a graduate from Yale University in 1948. From Yale University, goes back to Cuba. He was the leader and the director of 5 bottling plants. When the revolution started, he was pulled from Cuba to Miami and then was given responsibilities in the Caribbean. Ultimately, he gets pulled to headquarters of Coca-Cola in Atlanta. Meteoric rise, and by 1979, he is appointed president of the Coca-Cola Company. 2 years later, he becomes chairman, and for the next 17 years, he led one of the most powerful organizations in all of the world. Not only did he run a company, he created the most powerful brand in the world, Coca-Cola. Introduced and innovated projects such as Diet Coke, New Coke, and completely reinvented the business itself. As a matter of fact, a key attribute of Roberto Goizueta was, if you are not risking, you are not likely to fail. But if you do not risk, you will fail. It is our responsibility to risk and innovate, because if you do not risk, you will do nothing. That's the inspiration that he gave all of us. And everybody in this room can associate with those words, because you risked it all. Aside from Roberto, we recognize other individuals that had major contributions. Dr. Niels Diaz. Dr. Niels Diaz was the chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Agency for the United States. Amazing. A foreigner that comes to our land, graduates from the University of Miami, gets his doctorate, and is running the Nuclear Regulatory Agency. Dr. Mitch Maidike, president of one of the largest universities in the United States, FIU. And not only was the president, created a monstrous empire of what that university is all about today. Dr. Irving Vladovsky Berger, Kubiche. Director and founder of IBM's Internet division. Now, you think of something that changed the world forever. Now, he did not invent the internet, but if you remember something called e-commerce, which was taking the internet and make it into a commercial enterprise, that was him. Finally, when we look at the responsibilities of the individuals that they've created here, we look at how they went about accomplishing it. This is a group, a culture that did not want or ask from the society, from the community, or from the government. That would have been an insult. It would have been lack of pride. Complete opposite. They made the system better. They did not take a penny from the system. They made the system better. They figured out a way to work within the system, created better infrastructure, better technologies, a better life. These were not very self-serving individuals. These were not politicians. They were not actors. They were not athletes in it for themselves. Their measure of success is leaving the world behind a little bit better than they found it. So with that, we're going to go through 3 presentations that are very, very opportune. The first one is from Delfín Molins. Delfín is not only a past president of the Cuban-American Association of Civil Engineers, but also a distinguished engineer within the Miami-Dade County engineering group. Delfín?
Yes, sir.
Please.
Thank you, Pete. Buenas noches a todos. Good evening. My name is Delfín Molins. Honrar honra, dijo José Martí. And that's exactly what we're doing tonight. The exhibit honoring the Cuban engineer. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the Cuban Heritage Collection for hosting this magnificent tribute to our forefathers. During the Cuban exodus, many prominent engineers left Cuba due to the communist regime that was established. This regime shattered the lives of many. They yearned for freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They were forced to rebuild their lives and had to recreate their careers in exile. In a new environment and language. Luckily, we were welcomed with open arms by the generosity of the American people, recapturing our hopes, vision, and prosperity that aligned with the American dream. One individual who excelled was Israel Seinuk, born December 21st, 1931, and graduated the University of Havana in '54. In Israel's early years, he worked on the Foxa building, a 120-meter high building, that's 400 feet, folks, making it the largest building in Cuba, located in El Vedado neighborhood of Havana. It was one of the 7 wonders of Cuban civil engineering. Its completion in 1956 was considered a national landmark due to the modern technology and changing Havana's landscape. Israel was a licensed professional engineer in over 20 states. Next time you're walking down the streets of New York City, look up and you can appreciate his works. He worked on structures including New York's Lipstick Building, Mercantile Exchange, Condé Nast Building, just to name a few. Seinuk was also worked on a number of skyscrapers for Donald Trump, such as Trump World Tower, Trump International Hotel and Tower, and Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue. He was a structural engineer who made tall buildings stand. His influence can be seen in downtown Miami's Adrian Arch Center and Trump Royal in Sunny Isles. He was named Time